if you could be any character in the Bible other than Jesus, who would you want to be like, or who would you want to be? And equally, if there's any character in the Bible that you wouldn't want to be, and then I'll be interested to know your answers. And yeah, we're in chapter 26. It's quite a long chapter, so we might not do it all. Or maybe everyone's here. Let's begin. So, anyone got any thoughts about who they'd be if they could pick a character? Just shout out. Ruth. Who? Sorry, Riffy. Job part 2. You mean after all his suffering? It's a bit selective, but yeah, I'll take that. Job. Go on, Job part 2. Mary Magdalene. Any others? Nope. John. Okay. Anyone that they wouldn't want to be? Who? Herod. Judas. There we go. Yeah, I mean, Herod's pretty bad, but I was expecting everyone to shout Judas straight away. Obviously, chapter 26 features Judas, so let's read it, and let's look at what's going on there. So, when Jesus had finished saying all these things, he said to his disciples, "As you know, the Passover is 2 days away, and the Son of Man will be handed over to be crucified." Then the chief priests and the elders of the people assembled in the palace of the high priest, whose name was Caiaphas, and they schemed to arrest Jesus secretly and kill him. But not during the festival, they said, or there may be a riot among the people. While Jesus was in Bethany in the home of Simon the leper, a woman came to him with an alabaster jar of very expensive perfume, which she poured on his head as he was reclining at the table. When the disciples saw this, they were indignant. "Why this waste?" they asked. "This perfume could have been sold at a high price and the money given to the poor." Aware of this, Jesus said to them, "Why are you bothering this woman? She has done a beautiful thing to me. The poor you will always have with you, but you will not always have me. When she poured this perfume on my body, she did it to prepare me for burial. Truly I tell you, wherever this gospel is preached throughout the world, what she has done will also be told in memory of her." Then one of the 12, the one called Judas Iscariot, went to the chief priests and asked, "What are you willing to give me if I deliver him over to you?" So they counted out for him 30 pieces of silver. From then on, Judas watched for an opportunity to hand him over. On the first day of the festival of unleavened bread, the disciples came to Jesus and asked, "Where do you want us to make preparations for you to eat the Passover?" He replied, "Go into the city to a certain man and tell him, 'The teacher says, my appointed time is near. I am going to celebrate the Passover with my disciples at your house.'" So the disciples did as Jesus had directed them and prepared for the Passover. When evening came, Jesus was reclining at the table with the 12, and while they were eating, he said, "Truly I tell you, one of you will betray me." They were very sad and began to say to him one after the other, "Surely you don't mean me, Lord." Jesus replied, "The one who has dipped his hand into the bowl with me will betray me. The Son of Man will go just as it is written about him, but woe to that man who betrays the Son of Man. It would be better for him if he had not been born." Then Judas, the one who would betray him, said, "Surely you don't mean me, Rabbi?" Jesus answered, "You have said so." While they were eating, Jesus took bread, and when he had given thanks, he broke it and gave it to his disciples, saying, "Take and eat, this is my body." Then he took a cup, and when he had given thanks, he gave it to them, saying, "Drink from it, all of you. This is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many for the forgiveness of sins. I tell you, I will not drink from this fruit of the vine from now on until that day when I drink it new with you in my Father's kingdom." When they had sung a hymn, they went out to the Mount of Olives. Then Jesus told them, "This very night you will fall away on account of me, For it is written, I will strike the shepherd, and the sheep of the flock will be scattered. But after I have risen, I will go ahead of you into Galilee." Peter replied, "Even if all fall away on account of you, I never will." "Truly I tell you," Jesus answered, "this very night before the cock crows, you will disown me 3 times. But Peter declared, "Even if I have to die with you, I will never disown you." And all the other disciples said the same. Then Jesus went with his disciples to a place called Gethsemane, and he said to them, "Sit here while I go over there and pray." He took Peter and the 2 sons of Zebedee along with him, and he began to be sorrowful and troubled. Then he said to them, "My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. Stay here and keep watch with me." Going a little farther, he fell with his face to the ground and prayed, "My Father, if it is possible, may this cup be taken from me. Yet not as I will, but as you will." Then he returned to his disciples and found them sleeping. "Couldn't you men keep watch with me for 1 hour?" he asked Peter. "Watch and pray so that you will not fall into temptation. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak." He went away a second time and prayed, "My Father, if it is not possible for this cup to be taken away unless I drink it, may your will be done." When he came back, he again found them sleeping because their eyes were heavy. So he left them and went away once more and prayed the 3rd time, saying the same thing. Then he returned to the disciples and said to them, "Are you still sleeping and resting? Look, the hour has come, and the Son of Man is delivered into the hands of sinners. Rise, let us go. Here comes my betrayer." While he was still speaking, Judas, one of the 12, arrived. With him was a large crowd, armed with swords and clubs, sent from the chief priests and the elders of the people. Now the betrayer had arranged a signal with them. "The one I kiss is the man, arrest him." Going at once to Jesus, Judas said, "Greetings, Rabbi," and kissed him. Jesus replied, "Do what you came for, friend." Then the men stepped forward, seized Jesus, and arrested him. With that, one of Jesus' companions reached for his sword, drew it out, and struck the servant of the high priest, cutting off his ear. "Put your sword back in its place," Jesus said to him, "for all who draw the sword will die by the sword. Do you think I cannot call on my Father, and he will at once put at my disposal more than 12 legions of angels? But how then would the scriptures be fulfilled that say it must happen in this way?" In that hour Jesus said to the crowd, "Am I leading a rebellion that you have come out with swords and clubs to capture me? Every day I sat in the temple courts teaching, and you did not arrest me. But this has all taken place that the writings of the prophets might be fulfilled." Then all the disciples deserted him and fled. Those who had arrested Jesus took him to Caiaphas the high priest, where the teachers of the law and the elders had assembled. But Peter followed him at a distance, right up to the courtyard of the high priest. He entered and sat down with the guards to see the outcome. The chief priests and the whole Sanhedrin were looking for false evidence against Jesus so that they could put him to death. But they did not find any, though many false witnesses came forward. Finally, 2 came forward and declared, "This fellow said, 'I am able to destroy the temple of God and rebuild it in 3 days.'" Then the high priest stood up and said to Jesus, "Are you not going to answer? What is this testimony that these men are bringing against you?" But Jesus remained silent. The high priest said to him, "I charge you under oath by the living God, tell us if you are the Messiah, the Son of God." "You have said so," Jesus replied. "But I say to all of you, from now on you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the Mighty One and coming on the clouds of heaven." Then the high priest tore his clothes and said, "He has spoken blasphemy. Why do we need any more witnesses? Look, now you have heard the blasphemy. What do you think?" "He is worthy of death," they answered. Then they spat in his face and struck him with their fists. Others slapped him and said, "Prophesy to us, Messiah. Who hit you?" Now Peter was sitting out in the courtyard, and a servant girl came to him. "You also were with Jesus of Galilee," she said. But he denied it before them all. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said. Then he went out to the gateway where another servant girl saw him and said to the people there, "This fellow was with Jesus of Nazareth." He denied it again with an oath, "I don't know the man." After a little while, those standing there went up to Peter and said, "Surely you are one of them. Your accent gives you away." Then he began to call down curses, and he swore to them, "I don't know the man." Immediately a cock crowed. Then Peter remembered the word Jesus had spoken, "Before the cock crows, you will disown me 3 times." And he went outside and wept bitterly. So, chapter 26, there's lots going on, loads of different people involved. Obviously, you've got all the religious people that are plotting to kill and condemn Jesus and arrest him. You've got Judas, you've got Peter, you've got all sorts of people. So there's lots to go on, but I might not cover it all, but I'm just going to pick out some things that I feel like, God wants to share with you all. So, first of all, it starts in verse 1. We've got, it sets the scene of these leaders, religious leaders, gathering together at the chief priest's house, isn't it, Caiaphas, and in his palace. And they're plotting to kill and crucify Jesus secretly. So this is sort of very demonic gathering where they're all plotting to see how they can bring down Jesus. You know, completely demonic gathering. You know, they're there plotting together, colluding together, and they're just scheming, aren't they? There's nothing more evil than that, is there? And so they're gathered together there. Then the story shifts to, supposedly all these people, the chief priests and elders. These are meant to be the respected, most highly revered, honored people. But it's just a pure bed of evil, isn't it? And then we shift in verse 6 onwards to another gathering at not the most highly revered, highly respected, highly honored person's house. Instead, this is Simon, whose identity is because he has leprosy or had leprosy. And we know from reading our Bibles that lepers were outcasts, were the most kind of unwanted, unhonored, dishonored, or disrespected people in society. And so you've got these two things, the most honored and most powerful, I guess, and most holy, supposedly, and then a gathering at the house of someone who's considered unclean, unworthy of any sort of contact with humans, Simon the leper. And there's women as well. So it says, a woman came to him. So obviously in those days, women were seen as second-class citizens. And so you can see these two contrasting places. But the one place where worship of God's going on is here, as we see. So it says, a woman came to him with an alabaster jar of very expensive perfume, which she poured on his head as he was reclining at the table. Now, this was Mary. If you can read it in 3 different Gospels, this account. There's extra little details that aren't here and different kind of perspectives. But basically, this perfume that she had, this jar of perfume, was worth a year's wages of a labourer. It wasn't cheap. The other day, I spent a bit of money on some aftershave. It wasn't cheap. If you get perfume, it's not cheap. Obviously, you can get the kind of fake pretend ones, but they're not as good, are they? But the real stuff is not cheap. And I wouldn't just, put it on whenever and wherever. I would save it for a special occasion, wouldn't I? I wouldn't, if I got home and just poured it all over my head or someone else's head, Grace and the kids would be like, what are you doing? You've just spent all that money on that perfume. Don't waste it. Now, it wasn't a year's wages. I'll tell you that. It wasn't as much as that. But, if there was perfume out there that did cost a year's wages, I definitely wouldn't be pouring it out on Grace or, something like that. But it says the disciples saw this and were indignant. And they saw it as waste. Through their eyes, it was waste. But this woman, Mary, saw it through God's eyes, didn't she? Or Jesus saw what she was doing, which it wasn't waste, it was extravagant devotion. Now, if you're in love with someone, and obviously, think back to those days of being in love and just all you can think about is the other person, and you just, I don't know about you, but I would have spent any amount of money, any amount of time on Grace when we first met. There was nothing that she wasn't worth. I still feel like that. However, the practicalities of life and the fact that you've got bills and a mortgage and children to clothe and putting fuel in the car and energy and all of that sort of thing, you've got to be a bit more sensible, haven't you? It's not sustainable to go through life spending ridiculous amounts of money and time on that person. And obviously, your love becomes deeper and more meaningful than just extravagant amounts of spending money. And equally, Grace has she's never been one to go, I'd be like extravagantly spending time or money on something. Grace would be like, oh, why would you do that? That's so inefficient. What a waste. I'm like, just enjoy it. So we're very different when it comes to spending money. Grace is very frugal, and I'm a bit of a spender. And so I have to always balance, what's the amount that would be tell her that I am devoted and love and care for her versus going into the threshold of, you stupid person, why have you wasted all that money? So you've got to get that balance right. But here, this Mary is just, you know what, this perfume that I had. Now, they weren't poor. Mary and Martha and Lazarus were a fairly kind of, you'd probably say, middle-class family. They weren't like homeless, they weren't beggars, but they certainly weren't like, royalty or the elite. They were kind of middle class. And so they had a bit of wealth, and the chances are that either she'd saved for ages and ages and ages to buy this perfume, or it was like inherited as a family sort of heirloom, and but equally it was probably the most precious thing she had, the most valuable thing that she had, and she chose to waste it on Jesus because she'd seen what the disciples hadn't seen, and she'd seen why Jesus was going to die. Jesus had told the disciples 3 times that he had come to suffer and die, and they just didn't get it. And but she saw it, and she knew why, and she knew that Jesus was dying for her. And as a result, this outpouring of devotion and worship and love, extravagant love, was done to Jesus because that was the most precious thing she had, and she wanted it to be given to Jesus because she was just so in love with him because of what he'd done or what he was about to do or what she knew or she understood what he was about to do, and so she did that. But the disciples who were clueless about Jesus' having to die were like, what a waste. It could have been given to the poor. And in particular, we know that Judas took offense. He was probably the most upset. He was the treasurer for Jesus' ministry. And we don't know much about what Jesus did. What Judas did, sorry. Need to make sure I get those words right. We don't know much about what Judas did before he became a disciple. The Bible doesn't say, unlike the ones that were fishermen or tax collectors, we don't actually know what Judas did. He came from Judea. He was probably fairly intelligent, well-educated. He was the treasurer, so he maybe, had a financial background. He certainly, possibly, was one of the more intelligent disciples. We see Peter as being a bit impulsive and doesn't really think things through and just maybe not the wisest or cleverest disciple, but certainly the most passionate. But Judas was maybe a bit more kind of intelligent, I guess, and just really kind of a thinker, and maybe from the sort of like elite classes. And he took offense at this. Now, in verse 14, it says that then one of the 12, the one called Judas Iscariot, went to the chief priests. So basically, we've got these two settings. We've got the chief priests and elders plotting to kill Jesus in this sort of demonically empowered gathering. And then we've got this worship session where this woman who absolutely loves Jesus, just giving everything to Jesus. So we've got the two completely different situations. And Judas goes from one to the other, doesn't he? He leaves and goes to the chief priests. and asks, "What are you willing to give me if I deliver him over to you?" Now, a couple of questions here to ask is, well, first of all, why? What prompted Judas to do this? What was Judas's motivation? And we can speculate, but I think there are probably many things. The disciples didn't understand what Jesus' mission was and why he had to suffer and die. And a lot of the Jews in those days, were looking for a Messiah who would come in and just, overthrow all the people oppressing the Jews and Israel. And, get rid of the Romans, kill all the enemies, and basically rule as this all-conquering Messiah. That's what a lot of them wanted and were expecting. And, they'd been warned, or they'd been told 3 times by Jesus that this was going to happen. But you'll notice Judas going to betray Jesus happened pretty much straight away after this waste of money. And I think the thing with Judas is money talked to Judas. I don't think he certainly, I mean, if we look at the amount of money that he actually gets in verse 15, it says, "What are you willing to give me if I deliver him over to you?" The 30 pieces of silver was like a month's wages. So he's just seen a whole 12 months' wages wasted, and he's like, he goes, "How much are you willing to give me if I deliver him over to you?" I don't think the money was the motivation. A month's wages to betray the Messiah wasn't his motivation he certainly didn't want Jesus to die, and we'll see later. What Judas did wrong here is he thought he knew better than God. He thought he knew better than God. And if you look back at the original sin of Satan was that he thought he was better than God or knew better than God and people should worship him. And if we look at the temptation of Jesus, what's the devil trying to do all the time? Trying to control Jesus, isn't he? Just bow down, worship me. I want control. I want to be worshipped. I know better. And Judas, like the other disciples, probably thought that Jesus was going to come and destroy all the enemies and, put to death all those that opposed the Jews and set them free like that. What he didn't believe was that Jesus needed to die. And like I said, money talked to Judas. And so when he sees this woman waste a whole year's worth of perfume, a whole year's wages worth of perfume, and then he was probably expecting Jesus to go, "Oh, no, put the lid back on, you'll need that for your pension, you'll need that for, because she wasn't married, and so maybe you'll need that to support yourself. That would be the right thing to do." But Jesus doesn't say that. What does he say? He says, "Why are you bothering this woman? She has done a beautiful thing to me. The poor you will always have with you, but you will not always have me. When she poured this perfume on my body, she did it to prepare me for burial." Jesus had told them 3 times, "I'm going to die." But at this point, it's linked to money, isn't it? A whole year's worth of wages. And so now, he actually thinks, Jesus is serious. Because he's literally just seen a whole year's wages be wasted. And he's confirmed that he's going to die. So Judas's ears pricked up and gone, "What? He's actually serious about this." Because nothing gets our attention more than when money kind of big sums of money are involved in things, right? She's poured this perfume on my body. She did it to prepare me for burial. And so he's like, okay, right, Jesus is serious about this burial thing. And so I think at this point he's wanting to speed up things. He thinks that he just wants to see Jesus defeat all his enemies. And so he's like, you know what, I'm going to take charge here, I'm going to get involved, and I'm going to be in control, and I'm going to go and see if we can kind of get Jesus' enemies to kind of force Jesus to basically destroyed them. So he goes to the chief priests and sees, right, I'm going to deliver him over to you. And he's still expecting Jesus to defeat all his enemies, because he's like, right, I need to see this now. Jesus seems really serious about the fact that he's going to die, but I still don't think that's the case. I don't think he needs to. So let's just hurry up and make this happen and see what happens. And so he agrees to help them, to hand Jesus over to them. And then, obviously, there's the bit about the disciples preparing the Passover. You can see that Jesus makes preparations, doesn't he, in advance? The disciples weren't aware of this, but Jesus had thought about every little thing. He knew what was going to happen, and he'd already made preparations with this man that he told them to go and meet and find the room and the house where they were going to celebrate the Passover together. Then we've got the section where Jesus is with his disciples sharing the Last Supper, and he tells them that one of them is going to betray him. And they're all shocked. Even Judas is outwardly shocked, even though he knows what he's just done. Outwardly, he's, pretending that he's just shocked. What? Not me? What does he say? Then Judas, the one who would betray him, said, "Surely you don't mean me, Rabbi?" After literally just going and getting paid to hand him over. So outwardly, he's appearing like he really cares and is concerned, but actually it's complete deception, isn't it? It's complete deception. And Jesus says, "You have said so." But the other disciples clearly don't hear this. But this is, in spite of Jesus knowing what Judas is going to do, this is where Jesus now sort of does what Mary did, if you see it. So it says here, while eating, Jesus took bread, and when he had given thanks, he broke it and gave it to his disciples, saying, "Take and eat, this is my body." Then he took a cup. When he had given thanks, he gave it to them, saying, "Drink from it, all of you. This is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many." So at the start of this chapter, we've got Mary pouring out her perfume, the most precious and valuable thing she has, because she loves Jesus. But then we see Jesus here saying that he literally goes on to do it, but he pours out his blood for us, the most precious thing. And he pours it all out for us extravagantly. You could say, if you wanted to, you could say, oh, he's wasted it, because there are people who reject God's love. But he hasn't. And he's willing to pour out his blood for us so that our sins can be forgiven. Mary recognized that her sins were forgiven by Jesus' death, through Jesus' death. And so she's able to pour out the most precious thing. But this wasn't just a year's wages. This was the blood of Jesus that he poured out. And then he says, "I tell you, I will not drink from this fruit of the vine from now on until that day," verse 29, "when I drink it new with you in my Father's kingdom." When they had sung a hymn, they went out onto the Mount of Olives. And what we shouldn't ever do is be like Judas and trying to control God, thinking that we know better, trying to speed things up. I think God's going to come through. I know God's going to come through because it said, so let's hurry it along. We see in the Bible when people tried to hurry God's timing along, disastrous consequences came. And we see there's no greater disaster than what happened to Judas. And control is opposition. And we don't want to control God because we don't want to oppose God. If you think about any sort of control, it involves opposition. If you've got, cruise control on a car, the car is constantly monitoring the speed of the car. If the car goes too fast, what does it do? It opposes that speed by applying the brakes and reducing the amount of accelerator. If it's going too slow, it opposes that by speeding up and doing the opposite. In politics, we have and we keep our political leaders in control and stopping them from going out of control by having an opposition. So that if they step out of line, do something wrong, then there's an opposition to bring it back into line, under control. But when it comes to God, if we try and control things, if we try and control the Holy Spirit, if we try and control God's plan for our lives rather than letting his plan play out for us, we end up in opposition to God and we end up in a demonic place. It doesn't say it in Matthew, but I think in John it says that Satan entered into Judas. So you think, okay, so that was the moment. But up until that point, Judas had been trying to control Jesus. And with that final moment where he saw all this money wasted, it made him think, right, I've got to know, I've got to do something about this, because Jesus seems to be serious about this death thing, about him having to be death and buried. So I've got to work out. So I'm going to go to these people. I'm going to make sure it happens, that Jesus has this sort of point where he has to make a decision. He either suffers and dies, or he violently overthrows all the enemies. And he kind of forces this situation to happen. Now, obviously, we know that all of this is under Jesus' control. But from Judas' perspective, he was like, right, I've got to do this. I'm going to go do it. Anyway, they all pretend. Judas pretends that he doesn't know that he's going to betray Jesus. Jesus then talks about how his blood is poured out, extravagant love that God has poured out upon us. Then we go to verse 31, where we come to Peter's denial. And Peter is a courageous man, very courageous, a bit foolish, but courage, you can't say he isn't courageous. If you think about it, after Jesus was arrested, and all the other disciples fled, didn't they? But Peter didn't. Peter was still there. And that's the reason why we have this story of him disowning Jesus, because the others weren't even in a position to deny that they knew him, because they'd long gone. But Peter was very brave. He was actually sat, in the courtyard of the house of the high priest. And he was in a very dangerous position, because he too could have been, we'll take Jesus, we'll take you too. Courage. And so his love and devotion there was clear to see. But sometimes he felt like he could control things himself, with just through his sheer power and might. Judas thought he could control things by scheming with the enemy. Peter thought his pure just love and passion and zeal could control things. He says, even if I have to die with you, I'll never disown you. And all the other disciples said the same. And then the next minute, he's in the garden, can't stay awake with Jesus. Let's have a look. So it says, so Jesus is praying in the garden 3 times. He comes and they're sleeping. Then verse 45, it says, look, the hour has come and the Son of Man is delivered into the hands of sinners. Rise, let us go. Here comes my betrayer. So it's not rise, let us run away. It's rise, let's do this. Let's have this encounter. Then verse 47, while he's still speaking, Judas, one of the 12, arrived. With him was a large crowd armed with swords and clubs, sent from the chief priests and elders of the people. And again, they're armed with swords and clubs because they thought that Jesus was going to turn to violence, and so they thought, right, we're gonna have to have a battle here. But Jesus instead, what does he do? He doesn't put up a fight. Peter does try to put up a fight, and graciously, because of Jesus' love for Peter, he heals the ear. Because if he hadn't healed the ear, Peter could well have ended up the same way as Jesus. But Jesus loved Peter so much that even in his mistakes, he healed the servant of the high priest's ear, so that Peter wouldn't actually be caught up in Jesus' punishment. Put your sword back in its place, Jesus said to him, for all who draw the sword will die by the sword. Then Jesus says, do you think I cannot call on my Father, and he will at once put at my disposal more than 12 legions of angels? But how then would the scriptures be fulfilled that say it must happen in this way? Then Jesus says, am I leading a rebellion that you have come out with swords and clubs to capture me? Every day I sat in the temple courts teaching, you did not arrest me. But this has all taken place that the writings of the prophets might be fulfilled. Then all the disciples deserted him and fled. So there we go. So when they realized that Jesus wasn't going to fight, it was like, okay, we'll go too then. And so that's where they, maybe they just realized finally at that point, when they fled, they realized, oh, Jesus was right. He is going to die. I don't want to die. I'm going to go. And then obviously Jesus was taken to the high priest. Peter followed though. He didn't flee. But then we have him denying that he knows Jesus. And I just want to go to chapter 27 briefly, just to finish off kind of the strand with Judas. Verse 3 of 27, it says, when Judas, who had betrayed him, saw that Jesus was condemned, he was seized with remorse and returned the 30 pieces of silver to the chief priests and the elders. I have sinned, he said, for I have betrayed innocent blood. What is that to us, they replied. That's your responsibility. So Judas threw the money into the temple and left. Then he went away and hanged himself. Now, the devil will pretend to be your friend to get what he wants, which is you to oppose God, to side with him, to join in his rebellion, to join in his disobedience. He will do whatever it takes to get you. He'll give you whatever you want, whatever money you want, but as soon as he's got you, what does he say? What's that to do with me? He doesn't want anything to do with you. He doesn't care, pretend to care about you. But as soon as he's got you, that's it. You're not worth anything, because he's a deceiver. You saw that Judas deceived Jesus, and sometimes there's a temptation to go that way, because actually maybe it's easier to try and control God, to hurry up his plan, to just kind of test God. Judas thought, right, well, I'll go and get all these people that want to kill Jesus, because if I get a load of people around Jesus that want to kill him, suddenly then he'll turn into my superhero and destroy everyone. So he maybe thought he was doing Jesus a favor. I'm going to make God do his thing. But that's a very dangerous place to be, because we can be deceived. Clearly Judas allowed Satan to work in his life, because rather than just submitting to the work of Jesus and being patient, actually obeying Jesus, he tried to control Jesus. And we shouldn't ever try and control God's plans, even if we don't like them. He clearly didn't like Jesus' plan that he was just going to die and that was it. He wanted to see God move. He wanted to see victory. He wanted to see just this glorious thing. But Jesus was like, no, I'm going to suffer and die. And, even today we see, some of the churches that have kind of turned away from the truth of the Bible because they don't want to upset people. They don't want to upset people because they think, actually, that's not a very palatable message. So they try and control God's message, and it becomes demonic and destroys people. We should let God be God. We should let God be God, because ultimately, if we don't, we try and control God, we end up in a unimaginable situation. We see Judas realizes what he's done, but it's too late. He realizes that actually He's tried to control God. He's colluded with the enemy. And now it's too late. And he's got nowhere to turn other than to just kill himself. And that's ultimately what the devil wanted. The devil wanted him to collude, to betray Jesus, and he also wanted Judas dead as well. And so that desire, that temptation to control God's plan for your life can quite easily be our downfall as well. We can think, you know what, I want God to move in this way. I want God to come through for me in my life in this way that I like or that I think is best, rather than just being prepared to allow God to work however he wants, even if it means that we actually might suffer. It might be more difficult. It might not make sense. We might just not understand it. The disciples didn't understand Jesus' plan, did they? It might cause us to flee. But ultimately, if we try and control God, we'll end up like Judas. If we follow God rather than controlling him, yes, it might be painful. Yes, it might be difficult. Yes, it might cause us to kind of run away in fear. But actually, on the other side, we're restored, aren't we? We see the difference between Judas and Peter. Peter was restored because he didn't scheme with the enemy. He didn't go and find other people who are, to try and almost push Jesus into a corner. He thought that he could fight his way out of things, but actually he didn't ever scheme with anyone else or kind of try and control Jesus. He wanted to fight side by side with Jesus, but at no point did he ever control. He said, I'll go with you wherever. What did he say? Let's have a look. Where is it? It's verse 35. But Peter declared, even if I have to die with you. So he was willing to die. He was willing to suffer and die. He just didn't quite understand that it wouldn't involve chopping people's ears off. I will never disown you. Whereas Judas wanted to avoid that death, didn't he? He never thought he'd actually need to do that. But when he realized that Jesus was serious, and then in chapter 27, when it says, verse 3, when Judas, who had betrayed him, saw that Jesus was condemned. So he wasn't expecting Jesus to be condemned. He was wanting this glorious Jesus who would just defeat all those enemies. But he saw that Jesus was condemned. He was seized with remorse and returned the 30 pieces of silver. But it was too late for him. He'd already committed the worst act in the whole of history. Yeah. So, like I said, the temptation to try and control things is great. And if we try and do that for too long, then in working in our flesh and what we think should happen, we can end up colluding with the enemy. And it's a dangerous place to be. Me and Grace named Matthias because he was the disciple that replaced Judas. Because that desire for control is a very dangerous thing when it comes to our faith, because we want to control our lives, we want to control other people, or we want to control and we end up opposing God. Whereas when we're actually like, you know what, God, whatever your plan is, how weird it looks, how scary it looks, how uncomfortable it makes me, how hard it is, how painful it is, I'm willing to go there. I might have wobbles. I might, struggle at times. I might run away for a bit like the disciples. But actually, you'll come good and you'll restore me and you will be there and you will kind of just give me the strength to continue. And you see that with all the disciples. Obviously, Peter's was the most dramatic restoration, but the other disciples all came back to Jesus, and we saw that glorious, the gospel, how it was, the church grew, and we're here today as a result of that, of disciples not trying to control things. So, yeah, when we don't understand what God's doing in our lives, just as I guess Abraham and Sarah, they tried to control things, and they thought, you know what, God's not going to come through for me, so I'm going to sort this out myself. Not a good place to be, because we see the fallout from that was terrible. So yeah, let's just submit to God. As hard, as difficult as that can be, it's the way to eternal life. Thank you.